Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon and watched as the massive space station grew larger on the view screen. His crew had been traveling for 3 months since leaving Earth, and this was the moment that would change everything for humanity. The station called the Confluence was unlike anything humans had ever seen. It stretched for miles in every direction with docking ports that could accommodate hundreds of ships at once. Lights flickered across its surface like a city floating in the darkness of space, and Jake felt his heart race with excitement and fear. The communications officer turned to face him with wide eyes. Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez had been monitoring alien frequencies for the past hour, and his hands were shaking slightly as he adjusted the controls. The translator software that Dr. Nicole Chen had developed was working better than anyone had hoped, and they were already picking up dozens of different languages from the station. Sam cleared his throat and spoke in a quiet voice that barely carried across the bridge. The station was hailing them and asking for identification codes that humanity obviously did not possess. Jake made the decision to respond honestly. He activated the communication channel and introduced himself as the captain of an exploration vessel from Earth. He explained that humans were new to faster-than-light travel and were seeking peaceful contact with other civilizations. There was a long pause before the response came through, and Jake could feel the tension in the air as his crew waited. The voice that answered was mechanical and translated, but the tone seemed welcoming enough. The Confluence was a neutral trading hub where dozens of species conducted business, and humans were invited to dock at port. 73 engineer Lisa Hayes was standing near the rear of the bridge, and she caught Jake's eye with a concerned look. She had been vocal about her worries ever since they left Earth, and now those concerns seemed more valid than ever. Lisa was responsible for the ship's experimental jump drive, and she knew that several alien species would be very interested in that technology. Jake gave her a small nod of understanding before ordering the helmsman to proceed to the designated docking port. The Horizon glided through the organized chaos of traffic around the Confluence. Ships of every imaginable design moved past them, and Jake found himself staring at vessels that looked more like living creatures than machines. Some were sleek and aerodynamic, while others were massive cargo haulers that dwarfed the human ship. The crew pressed against the windows and view screens to catch glimpses of the aliens moving about in visible sections of the station. It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Docking procedures took nearly an hour, as the station's automated systems guided the Horizon into position. Jake selected a small team to accompany him onto the station, while the rest of the crew remained aboard. Lisa Hayes insisted on coming along despite her earlier concerns, and Sam Rodriguez was essential for communication purposes. Dr. Carl Stevens joined them as well, since his background in anthropology might prove useful when meeting alien species for the first time. The 4 humans stood in the airlock and checked their environment suits one final time before stepping into the unknown. The Confluence interior was a massive open space, with walkways and platforms extending in all directions. Artificial gravity kept everything oriented to a common floor, and the atmosphere was breathable according to their sensors. Aliens of various shapes and sizes moved about their business and most barely glanced at the humans as they emerged from their ship. Jake felt a strange mixture of disappointment and relief that their arrival was not causing more of a stir. They were just another species in a galaxy full of wonders. A small creature approached them with what might have been a smile on its face. The translator identified it as a Trell, and the being welcomed them to the Confluence in a high-pitched voice. It offered to serve as their guide for a reasonable fee, and Jake quickly agreed, since navigating the massive station on their own would have been nearly impossible. The Trell led them through a maze of corridors and marketplaces where vendors sold everything from food to weapons to what appeared to be living creatures in cages. They had been exploring for about 2 hours when Jake noticed that they were being followed. 3 large aliens in dark armor had been shadowing their group since they left the marketplace, and Jake's military training made him aware of potential threats. He quietly alerted Lisa and Sam while trying not to show any outward concern. The Trell guide seemed nervous and kept increasing their pace through the corridors. The confrontation happened in a quieter section of the station where fewer beings were present. The 3 armored aliens blocked their path, and their translator rendered their speech with harsh, aggressive tones. They identified themselves as Vakari warriors, and demanded to inspect the human ship for security purposes. Jake tried to remain diplomatic and explained that the Horizon was a peaceful exploration vessel with nothing to hide. The largest Vakari stepped forward and Jake could see what might have been contempt in its eyes. The alien spoke again, and this time the threat was clear. The Vakari Empire controlled this sector of space, and all new species were required to submit their technological specifications for review. Any refusal would be considered an act of hostility against the Empire. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but before he could respond, Lisa stepped forward. She looked up at the massive alien warrior and spoke in a clear, firm voice. She told them that humanity did not submit to threats and that their technology was their own business. The tension in the corridor became thick enough to cut. The lead Vakari warrior reached for what was clearly a weapon at his side, and Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his own sidearm. For a moment it seemed like violence was inevitable, but then the Vakari simply laughed. It was a deep rumbling sound that seemed to shake the floor beneath their feet. The warrior told Lisa that her species would learn respect soon enough, and that the Vakari did not tolerate insolence from inferior races. He turned and walked away with his companions following behind. Jake and his team returned to the Horizon quickly after that encounter. The mood on the bridge was somber as they prepared to depart from the confluence. Sam had picked up communications traffic suggesting that the Vakari were planning something, and Jake made the decision to head back to Earth immediately. They undocked from the station and engaged their jump drive without waiting for proper clearance from traffic control. The journey back to Earth took 3 months, just like the outbound trip. Jake sent detailed reports ahead using quantum communication buoys and warned Earth's defense forces about the potential Vakari threat. He hoped that it was all just bluster, and that the aliens would forget about the brief encounter. That hope died when they emerged from their final jump and found a Vakari fleet waiting in orbit around Earth. High Warlord Creven's face appeared on every screen aboard the Horizon. His message was being broadcast to Earth and every human vessel in the system. The Vakari Empire had followed the humans home and now demanded immediate surrender. Humanity had 48 hours to submit to Vakari authority, or their homeworld would be reduced to ash and dust. The countdown began, and Jake Morrison realized that his exploration mission had brought war to humanity's doorstep. High Warlord Creven sat in his command chair aboard the massive warship Domination and studied the scans of the primitive human homeworld. The planet called Earth orbited a yellow star and showed signs of heavy industrialization, but nothing that impressed the Vakari commander. He could see scattered orbital stations and a modest collection of defensive satellites that looked almost pathetic compared to the firepower his fleet possessed. A few dozen warships floated in formation around the planet, and Creven counted them with growing amusement. These humans had no idea what real military power looked like. The Vakari fleet consisted of 87 warships ranging from fast attack cruisers to massive dreadnoughts like the Domination. Each vessel was armed with plasma cannons that could melt through starship hulls like butter, and energy shields that had proven nearly impenetrable in countless battles. Creven had conquered 17 star systems in his career, and this would be the easiest victory yet. He almost felt disappointed that the humans were not putting up more of a show. Admiral Kevin Price was having the worst day of his life. The commander of Earth's United Defense Force sat in his operations center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains and watched the tactical displays with growing dread. The Vakari fleet had positioned itself in high orbit and was clearly preparing for an assault. Kevin had 48 hours to either surrender his entire species or watch as alien warships destroyed everything humanity had built. He rubbed his tired eyes and tried to think of options that did not end in total extinction. The president was on a secure line demanding answers that Kevin did not have. The military had known for years that first contact might not go well, but nobody had prepared for this scenario. Earth's defense fleet was designed to handle pirates or rogue asteroids and not a full-scale invasion by a hostile alien empire. Kevin looked at the weapons inventory and felt his stomach turn. They had nuclear missiles and railguns and some experimental energy weapons that had never been tested in actual combat. It would be like throwing rocks at a tank. Kevin made a decision that would either save humanity or doom them forever. He activated a communication channel that very few people knew existed and sent out a coded message to 3 locations in the solar system. The first was a hidden military facility on Mars where Dr. Nicole Chen worked on advanced weapons research. The second was a construction yard concealed behind Jupiter's largest moon, where a secret project had been ongoing for 5 years. The third was a small base in the asteroid belt where Commander Greg Palmer trained pilots for a mission that everyone hoped would never be necessary. On the surface, Kevin played for time. He opened a communication channel with the Vakari fleet and told High Warlord Kreven that humanity needed time to consider the terms of surrender. The alien commander appeared on the screen with what might have been a smirk on his face. Kreven agreed to extend the deadline by 12 hours as a gesture of mercy, but warned that any deception would result in immediate annihilation. Kevin thanked him with false sincerity and ended the transmission. Dr. Nicole Chen received Admiral Price's coded message while she was analyzing data from the Vakari fleet scans. The Mars facility had been monitoring the alien ship since they arrived, and Nicole had discovered something interesting. The Vakari relied heavily on centralized command structures with all tactical decisions flowing through the flagship. Their shield technology was impressive, but it operated on a predictable rotation cycle that created microsecond windows of vulnerability. Most importantly, their ships moved in rigid geometric formations that showed zero flexibility or creativity. Nicole worked through the night compiling her findings into a tactical briefing. She identified weak points in the Vakari shield harmonics and calculated firing solutions that could exploit those weaknesses. The data was transmitted to Admiral Price's command center using quantum-encrypted channels that the aliens could not intercept. Nicole included a personal note at the end of her report. She told Kevin that the Vakari were powerful, but they fought like machines following a program. Humans were survivors, and survivors did not play by anyone else's rules. Commander Greg Palmer received his orders while running training simulations with his squadron. The asteroid belt base was home to 200 pilots who volunteered for what everyone called the Swarm program. Their ships were small and fast with minimal armor and weapons that seemed inadequate for ship-to-ship combat. The entire concept had been considered crazy when it was first proposed, but Kevin Price had approved the funding anyway. Now it looked like the crazy idea might be humanity's only chance. Greg gathered his pilots in the briefing room and explained the situation. The Vakari fleet was about to attack Earth, and the Defense Force needed time to mobilize hidden assets. The Swarm's job was to harass the enemy and create chaos in their formations without engaging in direct combat. It was a suicide mission dressed up as tactics, and everyone in the room knew it. Not a single pilot asked to be excused from the duty. High Warlord Kreven grew impatient as the human deadline approached. The Admiral called Kevin Price had requested another extension, and Kreven decided that he had been generous enough. He ordered his fleet to begin the assault 1 hour early as punishment for the humans wasting his time. The Vakari warships moved into attack formation with the Domination at the center, and cruisers spreading out in a perfect geometric pattern. It was beautiful and terrifying, and exactly what Nicole Chen had predicted they would do. The first Vakari salvo destroyed 3 orbital defense platforms in massive explosions of fire and metal. The human defense fleet moved to intercept, but their weapons barely scratched the Vakari shields. Kreven watched with satisfaction as his ships carved through the primitive defenses like they were made of paper. He opened a communication channel to Earth and prepared to deliver his final ultimatum. Admiral Kevin Price appeared on the screen looking defeated and exhausted. Kreven demanded immediate and unconditional surrender. He wanted every human military asset powered down, and all government officials ready to submit to Vakari authority within the next 10 minutes. Kevin Price looked directly into the camera, and Kreven saw something in the human's eyes that gave him a moment of pause. It was not fear or desperation, but something else entirely. Admiral Price spoke a single word in response to the Vakari demands, and that word was no. The Vakari fleet continued their assault with increased aggression. Kreven was furious at the humans' insolence and ordered his ships to begin orbital bombardment of military targets. Plasma bolts rained down on Earth's surface, destroying bases and installations. The human defense fleet fought back desperately, but they were being overwhelmed. It looked like the battle would be over within hours, and Kreven was already composing his victory report. Then everything changed. Small, fast ships began appearing from the asteroid belt in numbers that seemed impossible. Greg Palmer's swarm came screaming out of the darkness with their engines burning at maximum thrust. They did not attack the Vakari warships directly, but instead targeted sensors and communication arrays with precision strikes. The aliens tried to shoot down the tiny human craft, but they moved in unpredictable patterns that made targeting difficult. Within minutes, the neat Vakari formations began to break apart as ships lost contact with the flagship. Creven shouted orders, but many of his vessels could not receive them. The swarm pilots were using some kind of jamming technology that disrupted Vakari communications at close range. More human ships appeared from hiding spots throughout the system, and these were not small fighters. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as asteroids or debris suddenly powered up and began firing railguns at close range. The projectiles punched through Vakari shields during the vulnerable rotation windows that Dr. Nicole Chen had identified. The battle turned into chaos. Vakari ships tried to reform their defensive positions, but the human attacks came from every direction. Small craft would dart in to disable sensors, while the platforms hammered away at shields and armor. The domination was taking damage, and Creven could not understand how these primitives were fighting so effectively. His tactical officers reported that human cyber attacks were flooding their systems with false data and contradictory orders. Some Vakari ships were firing on each other because they could not identify friend from foe in the confusion. Admiral Kevin Price watched the battle from his command center and allowed himself a small smile. The plan was working better than he had dared to hope. Earth's hidden assets were performing exactly as intended, and the Vakari were learning a hard lesson. Humans might not have the most advanced technology or the biggest ships, but they had something the aliens did not understand. Humanity had spent centuries fighting wars against themselves, and they had learned every dirty trick that warfare had to offer. The Vakari fleet began to retreat, and Creven knew he had made a terrible mistake. Commander Greg Palmer pulled his fighter into a tight spiral as plasma fire streaked past his canopy. The Vakari were getting better at tracking the swarm fighters, but they still moved too slowly to catch the nimble human craft. Greg keyed his communications and ordered his squadron to execute Pattern Delta, which meant hitting the enemy flagship from 3 different angles simultaneously. His pilots responded immediately, and 20 fighters broke formation to begin their attack runs. The coordination was beautiful and deadly, as they had practiced this maneuver 1,000 times in simulation. The Domination was the largest ship in the Vakari fleet, and it bristled with weapons on every surface. Greg knew that a direct assault on the massive warship would be suicide, but that was not what the swarm was designed to do. His fighters streaked past the hull at point-blank range and fired their weapons at the sensor clusters and communication arrays that dotted the exterior. Small explosions rippled across the Domination's surface as the precisely targeted attacks found their marks. The flagship was not destroyed, but it was effectively blinded and deaf, which was almost as good. High Warlord Creven screamed orders at his bridge crew as the tactical displays went dark. The humans were using some kind of concentrated electromagnetic pulse weapons that fried electronic systems without penetrating the ship's main armor. His engineers were working frantically to restore the sensors, but every time they brought a system online, another wave of fighters would destroy it. Creven had never faced an enemy that fought this way before. The Vakari method of warfare was based on overwhelming firepower and intimidation, but these humans refused to be intimidated. On Mars, Dr. Nicole Chen was monitoring the battle through military satellites, and she felt a surge of satisfaction as her predictions proved accurate. The Vakari shields were operating exactly as her analysis suggested, and the human weapons platforms were exploiting every weakness. She transmitted new firing solutions to the gun crews in real time as the battle conditions changed. Nicole had been against violence her entire life, but watching the alien invaders get pushed back filled her with a fierce pride. Humanity was showing the galaxy that Earth would not go quietly into extinction. Engineer Pete Morgan was stationed on one of the hidden weapons platforms that had been disguised as a mining station in the asteroid belt. His team had spent 3 years building the portable railgun system that was now tearing through Vakari hulls. The weapon used magnetic acceleration to fire tungsten projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed, and the kinetic impact was devastating. Pete watched through his targeting scope as another Vakari cruiser took a direct hit and began venting atmosphere. He allowed himself a grim smile before ordering his crew to reload and acquire the next target. The Cyber Warfare Division was having the time of their lives. Lieutenant Amy Brooks sat in a darkened room surrounded by computer screens and directed her team's digital assault on the Vakari fleet. They had cracked the alien communication protocols within the first hour of battle, and now they were flooding enemy channels with false orders and corrupted data. Amy sent a command that made half the Vakari fleet think they were supposed to retreat, while the other half received orders to advance. The resulting confusion was beautiful, to watch as alien ships nearly collided with each other, trying to follow contradictory instructions. Dr. Carl Stevens had provided the psychological framework for the cyber attacks. His anthropological studies of alien behavior patterns from the Confluence encounter gave Amy's team the information they needed to craft messages that would cause maximum confusion. Carl had identified that Vakari culture placed extreme importance on hierarchy and following orders from superiors. By inserting fake commands that appeared to come from high, Warlord Creven himself, the humans were able to paralyze the enemy fleet's decision-making process. Admiral Kevin Price was coordinating the entire battle from his command center, and he could hardly believe what he was seeing. The Vakari fleet was in complete disarray, with ships breaking formation and retreating in random directions. His hidden assets were performing beyond expectations, and Earth's regular defense fleet was rallying for a counterattack. Kevin opened a secure channel to the construction yard behind Jupiter's moon and gave the order that would end this battle once and for all. It was time to reveal humanity's greatest secret. 6 massive warships emerged from their hiding place and began accelerating toward the battle. The dreadnoughts had been under construction for 5 years as part of a classified program that very few people knew existed. Each ship was nearly a mile long and armed with weapon systems that incorporated both human innovation and reverse-engineered alien technology from crashed probes. Captain Gary Nash commanded the lead dreadnought called the Defiance, and he felt his pulse quicken as they approached the enemy fleet. The other 5 dreadnoughts were commanded by Captains Helen Foster, Danny Walsh, Sophia Blake, Ryan Carter, and Linda Shaw. They had trained together for this moment, and now they moved as a single coordinated unit. The human dreadnoughts did not rely on fancy energy shields or plasma weapons. Instead, they were armored with layered composite materials that could absorb tremendous punishment, and they carried enough missiles and railguns to flatten a small moon. High Warlord Creven saw the new human ships approaching on his partially restored sensors, and he felt something he had not experienced in decades. It was fear. The 6 warships were primitive in design, but they were massive and heavily armed. Creven realized with growing horror that the humans had been hiding their true military capability this entire time. The small fighters and weapons platforms had been a distraction while these monsters moved into position. He tried to order his fleet to focus fire on the approaching dreadnoughts, but his communications were still compromised by human cyber attacks. The Defiance opened fire first, and the effect was catastrophic for the Vakari. Dozens of missiles streaked across space and slammed into enemy cruisers with nuclear fury. The railguns fired in rapid succession, sending projectiles through alien hulls like they were made of cardboard. Captain Gary Nash watched grimly as Vakari ships exploded or broke apart under the sustained bombardment. He took no pleasure in the destruction, but he would do whatever was necessary to protect Earth. The other 5 dreadnoughts joined the assault, and the Vakari fleet began to crumble. Ships that had seemed invincible just hours ago were now fleeing in panic as the human warships carved through their formations. Some Vakari captains tried to fight back, but their weapons were designed for long-range bombardment and not close-quarters brawling. The human dreadnoughts closed to point-blank range and unleashed everything they had. Creven made the hardest decision of his military career and ordered a full retreat. The Domination turned away from Earth and engaged its faster-than-light drive, while still taking fire from human weapons platforms. Other Vakari ships followed the flagship's example and jumped away in random directions, just trying to escape the slaughter. In less than 6 hours, the mighty Vakari invasion fleet had been reduced to scattered survivors running for their lives. The silence that followed the battle was deafening. Admiral Kevin Price stood in his command center and watched as the last Vakari ship vanished from sensors. His staff was cheering and celebrating, but Kevin felt only exhaustion. They had won this battle, but at a terrible cost. Hundreds of human pilots and soldiers had died defending Earth. 3 orbital stations were destroyed, and several cities had taken damage from the initial bombardment. The victory was real, but it was written in blood. Commander Greg Palmer brought his fighter back to base with less than 5 minutes of fuel remaining. He had lost 42 pilots from his squadron, and each death weighed heavily on his conscience. Greg climbed out of his cockpit and sat on the deck for a long moment, just trying to process what had happened. A young pilot named Rachel Morgan had sacrificed herself by ramming her damaged fighter into a Vakari cruiser's engine core. Her final transmission had been calm and matter-of-fact as she said goodbye to her squadron mates. Greg would carry that memory for the rest of his life. Dr. Nicole Chen received reports that her tactical analysis had been crucial to the victory. The firing solutions she provided had resulted in the destruction of over 30 Vakari ships. Nicole sat alone in her lab and cried for an hour because she had helped kill thousands of beings, even if they were trying to kill her species first. The moral weight of that accomplishment was almost crushing. Earth began picking up the pieces. Rescue crews searched for survivors in the damaged stations and cities. Engineers assessed the extent of the destruction and calculated repair costs that would take years to cover. The president addressed the planet and praised the defenders who had saved humanity from extinction. Admiral Kevin Price was hailed as a hero, but he knew the truth. They had won because the Vakari had underestimated them, and that mistake would not be repeated. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy, at the speed of light traveling through the quantum communication networks that connected civilized space. On the Confluence Station, thousands of aliens gathered around viewing screens to watch recordings of the battle that everyone had assumed would end in human extinction. Species that had suffered under Vakari oppression for generations saw something they had never dared to imagine. The mighty empire had been defeated by a species that most of the galaxy had never heard of. Until a few months ago, Ambassador Claire Newton had remained on the Confluence throughout the entire conflict despite Captain Jake Morrison's orders to evacuate. She had sent him back to Earth with warnings about the Vakari threat, but she stayed behind to maintain humanity's diplomatic presence. Now she stood in the central plaza and watched as alien representatives approached her with expressions that ranged from amazement to cautious hope. A Trell diplomat was the first to reach her, and the small creature spoke in rapid, excited bursts that the translator could barely keep up with. The Trell explained that the Vakari had controlled this sector for over a century and no species had ever successfully resisted their demands. Dozens of civilizations had been conquered or forced into tributary status. The Empire extracted resources and technology from subject species, while providing nothing in return except the promise that they would not be completely destroyed. It was a system built on fear and overwhelming military superiority. Until now, the galaxy had accepted Vakari dominance as an unchangeable fact of life. Claire found herself surrounded by representatives from species she had never met before. The Ossian Collective sent a delegation of tall, graceful beings who communicated through melodic tones. The Mirren Alliance dispatched 3 ambassadors who looked vaguely reptilian and spoke with careful precision. They all wanted the same thing, and that was to understand how humanity had accomplished the impossible. Claire tried to explain that Earth had prepared for centuries to defend itself, but she left out the specific tactical details that gave humans their edge. On Earth, the government was facing a decision that would shape humanity's future for generations. Counselor Frank Hughes argued passionately for a policy of isolation and defensive posturing. He pointed out that Earth's resources were stretched thin after the battle, and getting involved in alien conflicts would drain what little reserves remained. Frank believed that humanity should focus on rebuilding and fortifying the solar system, rather than making commitments to species they barely knew. His arguments were logical and many council members nodded in agreement. Counselor Beth Martin stood to present the opposing view. She was a former military officer who understood that wars were rarely won through defense alone. Beth argued that the Vakari would eventually return with a larger fleet and better tactics. Earth needed allies who could provide intelligence about the Empire's movements and resources. More importantly, humanity needed to establish itself as a legitimate power in the galaxy rather than a lucky anomaly. The vote was close, but Beth's position won by a narrow margin. Captain Jake Morrison was back in space within 2 weeks of the battle. Admiral Kevin Price had promoted him to Commodore and given him command of a battle group consisting of 1 dreadnought and 6 cruisers. Jake's mission was to return to the Confluence and assess potential allies, while gathering intelligence on Vakari capabilities and intentions. His second in command was Commander Julia Price, who happened to be the Admiral's daughter. She was sharp and cautious, and she made it clear that she did not trust the aliens anymore. Then Jake trusted the Vakari. The journey to the Confluence took 3 months, and Jake used that time to study everything humanity had learned about galactic politics, It was a complicated mess of alliances and rivalries that made Earth's history of international relations look simple by comparison. The Vakari Empire was powerful but not omnipotent. They controlled roughly 30 star systems and had tributary agreements with at least 50 more. However, there were other powers in the galaxy that remained independent through careful diplomacy or strategic location. Julia spent most of the trip analyzing the battle data and looking for patterns that worried her. The Vakari fleet had been caught off guard by human tactics, but High Warlord Creven had shown signs of adaptation toward the end of the fight. His ships had started to break formation and operate more independently, which suggested learning in real time. Julia wrote a report warning that the next Vakari attack would be much harder to repel because the enemy now understood that humans were dangerous. Jake's battle group arrived at the confluence and was greeted very differently than the Horizon had been months earlier. Station control gave them priority docking and a security escort that seemed excessive for a diplomatic mission. Ambassador Claire Newton met them at the airlock with a tired smile. She had been working non-stop to establish relationships with potential allies, and the stress was showing. Claire briefed Jake on the political situation and introduced him to representatives from 3 species that were interested in formal agreements with Earth. The Trell Commonwealth was a loose federation of small trading worlds that had been paying tribute to the Vakari for decades. Their representative was an older Trell named Kiv, who spoke with quiet dignity about his people's suffering. The Vakari took 30% of everything the Trell produced and threatened total destruction if they resisted. Kiv asked if humanity would consider a mutual defense pact, and Jake could see the desperate hope in the aliens' large eyes. The Osean Collective was more cautious in their approach. Their lead diplomat explained that the Oseans valued art and philosophy above military power, but they recognized that pacifism only worked when dealing with reasonable beings. The Vakari were not reasonable. The Oseans offered to share their advanced medical, technology, and cultural knowledge in exchange for protection against future Vakari aggression. The Mirren Alliance was already a significant military power, but they were spread too thin defending multiple systems. Their ambassadors proposed a joint defense treaty that would allow for coordinated responses to Vakari attacks. They were willing to share intelligence and tactical data that would help humanity understand the greater strategic situation in this sector of the galaxy. Jake listened to all 3 proposals and promised to relay them to Earth's government for consideration. He was impressed by the intelligence and sophistication of these species, but he also noticed things that concerned him. The Trell seemed almost too eager for human protection, which suggested desperation. The Oseans were clearly uncomfortable with military discussions, which might make them unreliable in a crisis. The Mirren were professional and capable, but Jake wondered if they saw humanity as junior partners or equals. Commander Julia Price pulled Jake aside after the diplomatic meetings and shared her concerns. She had been monitoring Confluence communications and picked up troubling reports. The Vakari were conducting raids on remote human outposts in the outer colonies. Small, fast attack groups were hitting mining operations and research stations before disappearing back into deep space. It was a guerrilla campaign designed to bleed Earth's resources and force humanity to spread its defenses too thin. Back on Earth, Admiral Kevin Price was dealing with the same intelligence reports. The Vakari were adapting their strategy and learning from their defeat. Instead of another massive fleet assault, they were using hit-and-run tactics that played to their strengths in speed and firepower. Kevin ordered additional ships to patrol the outer colonies, but he knew it was like trying to guard an entire ocean with a handful of boats. The enemy could strike anywhere, and the defenders had to be everywhere at once. Meanwhile, independent journalist Marcus Young was investigating rumors that seemed too fantastic to believe. Multiple sources claimed that ancient aliens called the Architects had seeded the galaxy with advanced technology millions of years ago. These architects had supposedly disappeared, but their facilities remained hidden on various worlds. Marcus had obtained classified documents suggesting that Earth's rapid technological advancement was connected to an architect facility discovered beneath Titan's methane seas. If true, it would explain how humanity had developed functional dreadnoughts in just 5 years. The galactic situation continued to evolve rapidly. Earth's government voted to approve defensive pacts with the Trell Commonwealth and the Mirren Alliance, while establishing cultural exchange programs with the ASEAN Collective. Human military advisors were dispatched to help train Allied forces in the tactics that had proven effective against the Vakari. In return, Earth received star charts and intelligence, data that revealed just how large and complex the galaxy really was. Jake Morrison remained at the confluence for 6 months, establishing Earth's permanent embassy and building relationships with dozens of alien species. He learned that the galaxy was watching humanity very carefully. Some species saw humans as potential saviors who could challenge Vakari dominance. Others viewed Earth as a dangerous newcomer that might upset the delicate balance of power. A few civilizations resented humanity for succeeding where they had failed. The Vakari raids continued, and casualties mounted slowly but steadily. The Empire was clearly planning something bigger, but 1 year had passed since the first Vakari invasion, and the galaxy had changed in ways that nobody could have predicted. Captain Jake Morrison now commanded a fleet that included ships from 5 different species working together under a unified command structure. The human officer stood on the bridge of his flagship and studied the tactical display showing the Vakari stronghold in the Kepler sector. This was the most heavily fortified position in the Empire, and taking it would send a message that could not be ignored. The combined fleet consisted of 40 human warships, 20 Mirran cruisers, 15 Trell corvettes, and a dozen ASEAN support vessels. It was the largest multi-species battle group ever assembled in this part of the galaxy. Jake felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him as he reviewed the battle plan one final time. Thousands of beings from multiple worlds were trusting him to lead them against an enemy that had terrorized the sector for generations. He keyed the fleet-wide communications and gave the order to advance. On Earth, Dr. Nicole Chen was working in a secret laboratory buried deep beneath Titan's frozen surface. The facility had been built around an architect structure that journalist Marcus Young's investigation had revealed to the public 6 months ago. The ancient alien technology was beyond anything humanity had ever seen, and Nicole's team had barely scratched the surface of understanding it. The current project was a weapon system that could theoretically destroy a planet, but Nicole struggled with the moral implications every single day. Admiral Kevin Price visited the Titan facility personally to review Nicole's progress. He looked older than his years, with gray hair and lines of stress etched deeply into his face. The Vakari raids had taken a terrible toll on the outer colonies, with over 10,000 human casualties in the past year. Kevin needed a weapon that could end this war permanently, but he also understood the responsibility that came with such power. He asked Nicole directly if the weapon could be built, and she told him yes, but she also warned that using it would make humanity no better than the Vakari. Engineer Lisa Hayes was working on a very different kind of project at the Confluence Station. She had partnered with scientists from 7 alien species to develop a universal translation system that went beyond simple language conversion. The device could interpret cultural context and emotional nuance, which allowed for true understanding between beings from completely different backgrounds. Lisa believed that many conflicts arose from simple miscommunication, and her translator could help bridge gaps that seemed insurmountable. Ambassador Claire Newton called it the most important invention since faster-than-light travel. The battle for the Kepler stronghold began with a coordinated strike from 3 directions. Jake's human dreadnoughts came at the station from above, while Mirran cruisers attacked from the flanks, and Trell corvettes provided harassment from below. The Vakari defenders were ready, and their response was devastating. Plasma fire filled space as both sides unleashed everything they had. Jake watched as 2 Mirran ships exploded in the opening. Minutes, and he felt sick, knowing that hundreds of beings had just died under his command. Commander Julia Price was stationed on one of the human cruisers, providing tactical analysis in real time. She had spent the past year studying Vakari combat doctrine, and she noticed something important. The defenders were using the same rigid formations that High Warlord Creven had employed at Earth. Julia transmitted new orders, suggesting that the enemy commander had not learned from the previous defeat. Jake seized on that information and ordered his fleet to implement the guerrilla tactics that had worked so well before. The Trell corvettes broke formation and began targeting communication arrays and sensors on the Vakari station. Their small ships were perfect for hit-and-run attacks, and the defenders struggled to track them. Mirran cruisers exploited the confusion by hammering the station's shields with sustained fire. Human dreadnoughts moved in close and deployed boarding parties to capture key sections of the facility. The battle turned into brutal close-quarters fighting as soldiers from multiple species fought side by side in the corridors of the station. High Warlord Creven was not at the Kepler stronghold because he was leading a much larger fleet toward Earth. The battle at the station was a diversion designed to draw human forces away from their homeworld. Creven had spent the past year studying human tactics and psychology. He understood now that these beings valued their home above all else, and he intended to exploit that weakness. The Vakari Armada consisted of over 200 warships gathered from every corner of the Empire. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in Vakari history, and Creven was certain that this time there would be no mistakes. Earth's defense network detected the incoming Vakari fleet when it was still 3 days away. Admiral Kevin Price activated every military asset in the solar system and called for reinforcements from allied species. He knew that even with help, the defenders would be outnumbered by at least 2 to 1. Kevin sat in his command center and made the hardest decision of his life. He authorized the use of the architect weapon that Dr. Nicole Chen had developed. If Earth was going to fall, then the Vakari homeworld would fall with it. Nicole received the authorization codes with trembling hands. The weapon was installed on 6 stealth ships that had been deployed months ago to strategic locations throughout Vakari space. Each ship carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust and cause a mass extinction event. Nicole had built the devices herself, and now she was being asked to activate them. She thought about the billions of innocent Vakari civilians who would die if she entered the final sequence. Then she thought about the billions of humans who would die if she did not. There was no good choice, only terrible necessity. Captain Jake Morrison received urgent orders to break off the attack on the Kepler stronghold and return to Earth immediately. His fleet had successfully captured the station, but the victory felt hollow when he learned about the massive Vakari Armada heading home. Jake ordered his ships to jump at maximum speed, but he knew they would not arrive in time to help with the initial defense. He could only hope that Admiral Price could hold out long enough for reinforcements to make a difference. The Vakari fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation around Earth. Supreme Overlord Tharn himself commanded the Armada from his personal flagship. He had come to personally oversee the destruction of humanity and ensure that no mistakes were made this time. Tharn opened a communication channel to Earth and delivered his ultimatum. Humanity would surrender immediately and accept total subjugation, or their planet would be reduced to a lifeless rock. He gave them exactly 10 minutes to respond. Admiral Kevin Price appeared on screens throughout the Vakari fleet. His face was calm and his voice was steady as he addressed Supreme Overlord Tharn directly. Kevin explained that humanity had placed weapons on every major Vakari colony world. If Earth fell, those weapons would activate automatically and destroy the entire Vakari civilization. It was mutually assured destruction on a scale that the galaxy had never seen. Kevin told Tharn that humans preferred to live in peace, but if forced to choose between slavery and mutual annihilation, they would choose death every time. Tharn did not believe the humans' threat at first. He ordered his fleet to begin bombardment of Earth's orbital defenses as a show of strength. Then one of the stealth ships sent a brief transmission that included precise coordinates of Tharn's own birthplace on the Vakari homeworld. The ship had been orbiting the planet undetected for 3 months. Dr. Nicole Chen followed that transmission with technical specifications, proving the weapon's capability. Tharn realized with growing horror that the humans were not bluffing. The Supreme Overlord called for a ceasefire and requested immediate negotiations. Ambassador Claire Newton arrived from the confluence with representatives from a dozen neutral species who would serve as mediators. The talks lasted for 6 days and covered everything from territorial boundaries to technology sharing agreements. The Treaty of Confluence, as it came to be known, established humanity as a recognized galactic power with protected territory and formal alliances. The Vakari Empire agreed to cease all aggressive expansion and pay reparations to the species they had. Conquered High Warlord Creven was present at the treaty signing, and he stood before Captain Jake Morrison with something that might have been respect in his eyes. The Vakari warrior admitted that he had underestimated humanity and paid a terrible price for that mistake. Creven told Jake that the Empire would honor the treaty, but he also warned that there were other dangers in the galaxy far worse than the Vakari. Humanity would need to stay vigilant if they wanted to survive in a universe full of predators. Earth began the long process of recovering from the war. The outer colonies were rebuilt, and new defensive stations were constructed at strategic points throughout human space. Admiral Kevin Price retired from active service but remained as an advisor to the government. Dr. Nicole Chen deactivated the planet-killing weapons and returned to pure research, hoping to never build such terrible devices again. Engineer Lisa Hayes continued her work on cultural understanding, and her translation technology was adopted throughout the allied species. Captain Jake Morrison took sea,